The Meridian Hotel in Miami wasn't just 5 stars. It was the kind of place where the stars themselves felt underdressed. Bridget Okafor had worked the private dining floor for 3 years, and she still caught herself staring at the chandeliers sometimes, those impossible cascades of Venetian crystal that threw prize medal light across tablecloths worth more than her monthly rent. She'd learned to stop staring on the clock. Mr. Haynes, the floor manager, had a particular talent for appearing exactly when you were doing something you shouldn't be. She smoothed her black uniform vest over her hips. The hotel had finally ordered her the right size after 6 months of her alteration requests disappearing into some HR void, and pushed through the service door into the private corridor. Table 9 had been booked under a corporate name, Halcyon Group. She'd looked it up once on a slow Tuesday. The search results were thin in a way that felt deliberate. A registered address in Delaware, a website with no actual information, 3 photographs of glass buildings that could have been anywhere. She didn't think about it much after that. Private clients were private for reasons that were none of her business. What she thought about, pulling a chilled bottle of Barolo from the cart, was that her little sister's tuition payment was due in 11 days, and that her checking account currently contained $412. The corridor ended at a set of mahogany double doors. She knocked twice, the way she'd been trained. Waited the correct 3 seconds. Pushed through. There were 6 of them at the table. 5 men who all had the particular quality of stillness that Bridget associated with people who had never been told no. And at the head of the table, a man who made the other 5 look like supporting cast. He was older. Mid-40s, she guessed. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. A charcoal suit that had been cut specifically for his shoulders, which were the kind that suggested he hadn't always worn suits. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at something on the phone he held loosely in one hand, expression closed and unreadable, while one of the other men spoke to him in low, rapid Italian. Bridget had heard a lot of Italian in this dining room. Miami had a particular kind of wealthy Italian clientele. She set the wine on the service table and began the standard greeting. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Bridget, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with still or sparkling water or—" "The Barolo breathes for 20 minutes. The man at the head of the table said, still not looking up from his phone. His English was perfect. American accent to the East Coast, she thought. New York, maybe Boston, not 15, not 18, 20. She paused for a fraction of a second. "Of course," she said. He looked up then. His eyes were dark and very direct, and they moved over her the way a person assesses something they are deciding whether to bother with. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then he looked back at his phone. One of the other men, broad, 30s, a jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once, leaned toward the man at the head of the table and said something low in Sicilian dialect. She caught enough to understand it wasn't about the wine. The man at the head of the table didn't react visibly. He simply said something back, still in Sicilian, still without looking up. 2 sentences, casual, almost bored. She caught every word. She set the first glass down in front of him and moved to the next place setting, her face pleasant and neutral, the way she'd trained it to be, and she thought, 20 minutes. She would give it 20 minutes. The appetizers came out at 7:40. The main courses at 8:15. Bridget worked the table with the efficiency she'd built over 3 years of private dining service. Present when needed, invisible when not. She refilled glasses without being asked. She removed plates at the precise moment the last fork was set down. She answered questions about the menu in the precise, knowledgeable way that Mr. Haynes had drilled into all of them. The man at the head of the table ate sparingly and spoke often. Not to her. To the men around him in a rotation of English and Italian, and, twice, a dialect she initially placed as Calabrese. The conversations were the kind that had a surface, and then a great deal underneath the surface, the way a lake looks shallow until you step in. She wasn't paid to understand them. At 8:40, she brought out the dessert menu. She set one in front of each man, the leather-bound cards that the hotel printed new every season, and when she reached the head of the table, she set his down and stepped back. He picked it up, glanced at it, said to the broad man on his left in Sicilian, "She has good posture for someone her size." "That's about all I'll give her." The broad man's mouth twitched. Bridget stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her face pleasant, her breathing even. She waited until he set the menu down. "Will you be ordering dessert this evening, sir, or would you prefer the cheese course?" He looked up. Same direct assessment. Neither. Coffee. Espresso, not the Americano you'll try to serve me. Of course. She turned to the next man, took the rest of the dessert orders, 2 tiramisu, 1 cheese, 1 nothing, and when she reached the foot of the table and had collected all the menus, she turned back to the room. "I'll have your coffee out momentarily," she said, to the table in general. And then, because she had made the decision somewhere between the appetizer course and now, she added, in the same unhurried, professional Sicilian, "And I hope your dessert is sweeter than your observations, sir." The room went very still. The broad man stopped mid-reach for his water glass. The man at the head of the table looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. Some quality of boredom lifted, replaced by something sharper. "Say that again," he said. "Your coffee will be out in 5 minutes," Bridget said in English, and pushed through the service door. In the kitchen, she stood with her back to the stainless steel counter and breathed through her nose for exactly 10 seconds. Marco, the line cook, gave her a look across the pass. "You okay?" "Fine," she said. "I need an espresso pull for table 9. Single. And make it good." He made it good. She carried it back through the double doors herself, rather than putting it on the tray pass because she needed those 30 seconds in the corridor to put her face back together. She set the espresso in front of him. Small white cup, perfect creamer, the hotel's monogram in the foam that the kitchen did for private dining guests. He was watching her this time, directly, without pretense. "Where did you learn Sicilian?" he said, not aggressive, actually curious, which somehow made it more unnerving. "My grandmother," she said. "Can I get you anything else?" "Your grandmother." "Yes, sir." He looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up the espresso cup, delicately, which she hadn't expected from those hands, and said, "Your grandmother taught you to insult guests in their native language. My grandmother taught me to understand when I was being insulted in mine." Bridget said, and to respond accordingly. The man 2 seats to his right made a sound that was not quite a laugh and was quickly converted into a cough. The man at the head of the table set the cup down. "What's your name?" "Bridget. Bridget." He said it like he was deciding whether it suited her. "I'm Luca Ferraro." She had heard the name before, once. From a sous chef who had worked a different hotel across town, who had described a private dinner in the kind of hushed, significant tone people used for natural disasters and very close calls. She had filed it in the same mental cabinet as things she was better off not thinking about. "Sir," she said by way of acknowledgement. His expression shifted, and she realized he was almost amused. "You know who I am. I know your name, and your espresso is getting cold," she said. "Is there anything else the table needs?" She expected to be fired. She expected it in the immediate aftermath, waiting in the corridor while the kitchen plated the desserts for the other tables. She expected it when Mr. Haynes appeared at her elbow at 9:30 with his particular expression of controlled distress. She expected it every moment of the 40 minutes she spent in the manager's office with the general manager, a man named Clifton, who kept touching his tie and choosing his words with the deliberateness of someone diffusing something. What she did not expect was the business card. Clifton slid it across his desk toward her. White card, heavy stock, embossed, no logo, just a number and 2 words beneath it. Ferraro Group. He asked that you be given this, Clifton said. He also asked that your service tonight be noted as exemplary, which I have to say Bridget is. He touched his tie again. Unprecedented in my 17 years in this industry, following what you did. I responded to a guest's comment, she said, in Sicilian. It seemed appropriate. Clifton looked at her the way people sometimes looked at her when they weren't sure if she was very brave or very stupid. She'd gotten that look before. She'd decided years ago that the distinction mattered less than people thought. She took the card. She didn't call the number. She put the card in the drawer of her bedside table, underneath the pharmacy receipt, and the folded note from her sister's last care package. And she went to work the next morning and the morning after that. She picked up a double shift on Friday. She paid what she could toward Chandra's tuition and set up a payment plan for the rest and told herself specifically and firmly that she was not going to call the number on a card given to her by a man whose name made sous chefs lower their voices. She almost made it a week. On day 6, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered because unknown numbers sometimes turned out to be about Chandra's financial aid, and she couldn't afford to miss those calls. Miss Okafor. His voice was the same as it had been in the private dining room. Direct, unhurried, like someone who had never needed to compete for a room's attention. You didn't call. She sat down on the edge of her bed. No. I'd like to offer you a position, not meet for coffee, not discuss a potential opportunity. A position. Like it was already decided and she was the last person to be informed. My assistant coordinator is moving to Chicago at the end of the month. The role involves logistics, scheduling, and oversight of a number of my private properties in South Florida. It pays considerably better than hotel service. She thought about Chandra's tuition. She thought about the payment plan. She thought about her grandmother who had told her in that same Sicilian that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was be in a room and have nobody understand her. I don't know anything about what you actually do, she said. You know more than you're saying, Luca replied. I know what people say. And what do they say? She looked at the bedside drawer. That your name is a word you don't say too loud. There was a pause. That's fairly accurate. And you want to hire me. I want to hire someone who caught a 4-word comment in Sicilian dialect while carrying a wine bottle and kept her face perfectly still, he said. And then chose her moment and her words with enough precision that my head of security almost choked on his water. That was Damiano. Another pause. Yes. He looked like security, she said. The broken jaw. Something happened in the silence on the other end of the line that she could not quite classify. Mrs. Okafor, can you be at the Halcyon offices on Brickell tomorrow at 10? She looked at the bedside drawer for a long moment. I'll need to arrange coverage for my shift, she said. I'll have someone call Mr. Haynes. She pressed her lips together. I can arrange my own coverage, Mr. Ferraro. The pause this time was different. A brief recalibration, she thought. Of course, tomorrow at 10. The Halcyon offices occupied 2 floors of a glass building on Brickell that looked like money trying very hard to appear understated. The lobby had a particular quality of hush that real estate agents called curated and that Bridget associated with places where the cleaning staff were instructed not to make eye contact with visitors. A woman at the front desk, early 30s, severe hair, the focused expression of someone extremely competent, who was slightly tired of demonstrating it, looked up when Bridget came through the revolving door. Mrs. Okafor, not a question. I'm Reyes. Mr. Ferraro will be with you in a few minutes. Can I get you anything? I'm fine, Bridget said. Thank you. She sat in one of the lobby chairs, low, architectural, the kind that looked like sitting in them but didn't make you feel like sitting in them. And watched the room. 2 other men waited near the elevator bank. A courier came and went. Somewhere above, a phone rang once and stopped. Reyes looked up. Mr. Ferraro will see you now. The elevator opened onto the upper floor without her pressing anything, which meant someone had been paying attention. She filed that away. His office was large and faced east, toward the bay. He was standing at the window when she came in, hands in the pockets of a dark navy suit, looking at the water with the specific quality of someone who has looked at many expensive views and is no longer surprised by them. He turned when she came in, looked at her the same way he had in the dining room, direct, assessing, but the duration was different, longer. Not uncomfortable exactly, but deliberate. "Mrs. Okafor," he said. "Sit, I prefer to stand," she said, "until I know whether I want to be here." He studied her. Then he pulled his hands from his pockets and sat himself, which she hadn't expected. He gestured at the chair across from his desk. "Then let's figure out if you want to be here." She sat. He was not. She decided over the following 40 minutes what she had expected. She had expected the performance of power, the deliberate pauses, the information withheld to create imbalance, the manner of a man who was very accustomed to people wanting things from him. And he had some of that, the stillness, the economy of movement, the sense of operating at a different altitude from the people around him. But he also answered her questions directly, not all of them. He told her clearly when something wasn't information she needed and why, which was different from deflecting. He explained what the coordinator role actually involved. Managing the legal operations of 4 private properties, liaising with the accounting and legal teams, coordinating with his personal staff, with the precision of someone who cared whether the person across from him understood. "The previous coordinator," she said. "Why is she leaving?" "She's getting married. Her partner took a position in Chicago. And you have a problem replacing her because the people I trust are not the people who know how to run a calendar and manage a contractor dispute simultaneously," he said. "And the people who can do that tend to leave when they understand who they're working for." She looked at him. "I understand who you're working for. You understand a version of it. Then give me a better version." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in it that felt like evaluation, but also, she thought, something that was close to respect. The Ferraro Group manages significant real estate holdings in South Florida, hospitality assets, and several private funds. The legitimate side is majority. The other side, he paused, is managed separately. Your role touches only the legitimate side. But I'd be working in the building. Yes, and knowing things. Yes, she thought about the drawer. The card. The payment plan that still had 9 months on it. "I'd like to see the offer in writing," she said. He opened his desk drawer and set a folder on the desk. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "You prepared this before you knew if I was taking the meeting." "I prepared it," he said, "because I already knew you were taking the meeting." She should have been annoyed by that. She was, a little, but she was also, and this was the part she didn't fully examine until much later, something close to impressed. She picked up the folder. She told Chandra she had a new job in corporate hospitality management. Chandra, who was 22 and studying environmental law at University of Miami, and had always been the sharper of the two of them, in ways that were sometimes inconvenient, said corporate hospitality management with who? And Bridget said Halcyon Group, and Chandra said I'm Googling that, and then was quiet for a moment, and then said their website is extremely vague. "It's a private company," Bridget said. "The building on Brickell is real," Chandra said. "I can see it on maps. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Bridge, I'm fine, Chandra. The pay is good. It covers the rest of your tuition." A longer silence. "You don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you," Bridget said. "I'm doing it because someone offered me a job that actually uses my brain," which was true. It was also not the whole truth. She spent a long time that night, not thinking about the rest of it. The first 2 weeks were what she would later describe as professionally revelatory and personally bewildering. Professionally, the work was real, demanding, and genuinely interesting. She was managing 4 properties simultaneously, 2 residential towers, a private marina, a restaurant group, navigating contractor schedules and HOA disputes and vendor contracts, and the particular chaos of coordinating between a legal team in Coral Gables and an accounting team in Wynwood who communicated exclusively through passive-aggressive email. Reyes, who she initially read as cold, turned out to be dry and funny, and the most efficient person she had ever encountered. And within 4 days they had developed a shorthand that felt like it had existed for years. Personally, she saw Luca Ferraro twice in those first 2 weeks, both times in passing in the building. Both times he looked at her directly. Both times he said her name with the same unadorned specificity he'd used when he offered her the job, as if names were things that deserved to be said properly. Both times she said good morning and continued to wherever she was going. She was not, she told herself, thinking about him. She was thinking about the job. The job was what mattered. The job was, objectively, measurably, the best professional opportunity she had ever had, and she was not going to complicate it by thinking about the way he'd sat down when she said she preferred to stand, like it was the most natural thing in the world to accommodate someone else's preference. She was not thinking about that. At the end of the 3rd week, he asked her to attend a meeting, not as the coordinator, as a consultant, he said, which she understood from context to mean that the meeting would include people from the other side of the operation, and that he wanted someone with him who could follow a conversation that might not stay in English. "That's not in my role description," she said. They were in his office. He was at his desk. She was standing this time because she was in the middle of a building walkthrough and had been told he needed to see her, and she'd come directly. He looked at her with the particular expression she had started to recognize. Not quite patience, not quite impatience, something calibrated between the two. It would be a separate engagement, he said. Separate compensation. You would attend as an observer only. You wouldn't be asked to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. With respect, she said, I'd like to define what makes me uncomfortable before you finish that sentence. Something in his expression shifted. That almost amusement again. The thing she'd seen in the private dining room when she'd asked if there was anything else the table needed. Define it. I won't be in a room where decisions are made about harming people. I won't carry anything across a border, literal or legal. I won't sign anything. I won't witness anything and then be asked to say I didn't witness it. Reasonable, he said. I'm not finished. He waited. If I'm ever in a room and I decide I need to leave, she said, I leave, without explanation, and that's not a problem. He looked at her for a long moment, agreed, and I want it in writing. He opened his desk drawer, set a folder on the desk. She looked at it, then at him. You're doing that thing again. The almost amusement became something a degree or two warmer. It's efficient. She took the folder. The meeting was in a private house on Star Island, which was a neighborhood that existed. She was fairly certain, specifically for the purpose of proving that a certain amount of money could buy its own zip code. The house was pale stucco and enormous. A man named Christopher met them at the door. 50s, Cuban-American, the kind of deliberate friendliness that had a great deal of work underneath it. He greeted Luca in English. Then he looked at Bridget, and she recognized the look, because she'd spent her whole working life receiving variants of it. The rapid, involuntary assessment that catalogued her size, her skin, her uniform, today, a good blazer over dress pants, because she had understood that this was that kind of meeting, and arrived at a conclusion that she was staff or decorative or not particularly significant. He said something to Luca in Spanish, fast, idiomatic, the coastal Caribbean inflection of someone from Havana. She filed it away. The meeting was an hour, 4 men, a table in a room with a water view that no one looked at, a conversation about shipment timing, about a port authority contact, about numbers that sounded like they related to a cargo business and almost certainly didn't. Bridget sat slightly back from the table, notepad on her knee, and said nothing. Toward the end, there was a disagreement about something involving a third party she didn't have context for. The conversation shifted fully into Spanish. Rapid and heated, and Christopher said something to one of the other men that was not a threat exactly, but the outline of one. Luca looked at her. Just briefly, she looked back, neutral. After, in the car back to Brickell, armored sedan, a driver she now recognized as Damiano, who had indeed turned out to be security, and who had extended a grudging professional respect to her after she correctly identified the make of his concealed carry at the end of her second week. Luca turned to her. What did Christopher say about the third-party contact? She told him. He was quiet for a moment. That's not what Christopher told me. No, she said. It's what he said. Luca looked out the window. The city moved past, bright and loud and enormous. Is there anything else I should know? She thought about it. He doesn't trust the Port Authority contact. He said the man is. The word he used roughly translates to someone who has been turned. Double-facing. Luca's expression didn't change, but his hand, resting on his knee, stilled completely. He said this to the room, she said, not to you. I know. You wanted to know what was said when it wasn't aimed at you. I wanted to know what you heard, he said. There's a difference. She thought about that for a moment. Thought about her grandmother, who had survived 30 years of a marriage that spoke over her head, and then, one day, spoke back. You should know, she said carefully, that this is what I'm good at. It doesn't make me a weapon. He turned from the window and looked at her. The directness of it was the same as it always was, the quality that had unnerved her in the dining room, and had, over 4 weeks, become something she no longer flinched from. I know what you are, he said. I doubt that, she said, another of those calibrated pauses. Tell me. She looked at the city beyond the window. Someone who needed a job, she said, and isn't sure yet what she walked into. It was more honest than she'd intended. She felt him register it. That's fair, he said. A month later, Chandra called her, not about tuition. She called because she had found an article, old, buried, the kind of thing that required intentional searching, about a federal investigation into a real estate group in South Florida, circa 5 years prior. The investigation had been closed. No charges. The article mentioned in passing a man named Ferraro. Bridget, Chandra said. I know, Bridget said. You knew. I know what I'm doing, do you? She was sitting at her desk in the Halcyon offices. Through the glass wall of her office, she had an office now, which she still wasn't used to, because she had spent 3 years in a shared staff room that smelled like industrial cleaner. She could see Reyes at the front desk, efficiently devastating an invoice dispute via email. I know what I'm good at, she said, and I know what I'm not doing. There's a line. I know where it is. And you trust the person you're working for to respect that line. She thought about the folder on the desk, the written agreements. The moment in the car when she had said, this doesn't make me a weapon, and he had said, I know what you are, and had not argued. I don't know yet, she said, but I think so. Chandra was quiet for a moment. You sound different. Different how? Awake, Chandra said. Like you're actually, I don't know. Like you're somewhere that's using you. Bridget didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, a courier came and went. The city was a painting through the eastern glass. Yeah, she said. That's about right. The line held. Not easily, and not without pressure. There were moments. A meeting she left midway through because of what was being discussed, which she had done without apology, and which had cost her 2 days of tense silence from a man named Ottaviani who was, she gathered, someone whose tense silences generally had consequences. Luca had not said anything about that. He had, at the end of those 2 days, simply indicated that her read on the situation had been correct and that the problem had been handled. She didn't ask what that meant. That was its own kind of line. There were other moments. An evening in late October, when the office had emptied, and he'd found her still at her desk, untangling a vendor dispute, that was somehow also a tax issue, and possibly a municipal code violation, and had set a takeout container on the edge of her desk without a word, and sat across from her in the spare chair and read something on his phone while she finished. She hadn't commented. He hadn't explained. An hour later, she'd closed her laptop, and they'd talked about the vendor dispute, about the property in Coconut Grove that had some kind of covenant complication going back to 1987, and then about something else entirely. She couldn't remember what, only that by the time she looked at her phone it was nearly 9, and she was surprised. There were smaller things. The way he'd corrected a man, senior to her, she gathered, in some organizational structure she didn't fully understand, who had addressed her by her first name without invitation. Miss Okafor. Not loud, not theatrical. Simply said, like a fact, and the man had adjusted without comment. And she had filed it away in the cabinet of things she was thinking about less and less at night. She knew where this was going. That was perhaps the most honest thing she could tell herself. She knew the shape of it, had known it, maybe, since the private dining room, since he'd said, "I know what you are," and she'd said, "I doubt that," and neither of them had been entirely wrong. She also knew, with the particular clarity she had developed over 26 years of being underestimated, that knowing the shape of a thing and deciding what to do about it were different problems. In November, there was an incident at the marina property. A disagreement with a group of men who had been using the private moorings without authorization, which was the polite framing of something that was, she understood, significantly less polite. Damiano called her at 6 in the morning, not because she was needed at the scene, because he couldn't reach Luca, and there were 2 contracts in her file that required authorization from someone with signatory rights, and the police were going to have questions about the property's ownership structure in about 45 minutes. She dressed in 6 minutes. She was at the marina in 20. She had the right people called, the right documents filed, and a very clear, very concise account of the legitimate operations of the property ready for the responding officers before they finished interviewing the harbour master. Later, in the car back to Brickell, Damiano was driving, because it was 6:40 in the morning, and that seemed to be Damiano's permanent job. He said, unprompted, "You're good." She looked at him in the rearview mirror. "The broken jaw," she said. "Miami, or before Miami?" He glanced back. Before bar, fight, or professional? The ghost of something crossed his face. "Professional." "Thought so," she said. "The set." He didn't say anything else, but she got the sense he was reassessing something, and she found she didn't mind. Luca reached her by phone at 7:15. He was already in transit. He asked her 3 questions in rapid succession, concise, specific, the way he always asked questions when something mattered, and she answered all 3. "Good," he said. "You were going to say something else," she said. A pause. "Thank you." She had the sense he didn't say it often. Maybe not often enough. She held it briefly, like a small, warm thing, and then she put her professional face back on. "The HOA for the Coconut Grove property sent another letter," she said. "The 1987 covenant. We should deal with that this week." A sound that was almost a laugh. "This week," he agreed. He told her, on a Tuesday evening in December when Miami was doing its closest approximation of cold, and the bay was the color of hammered pewter, that he had not expected her. They were standing on the terrace of the Brickell office. She'd come up for something, some document that needed review. And then he'd been there, looking at the water the way he did, and she'd leaned on the railing beside him without quite deciding to. "That's a strange thing to say to an employee," she said. "You're not just an employee," he said. She looked at the water. "You should probably be more careful about saying that." "Probably," he agreed, "but I'm not." She was quiet for a moment. The wind off the bay was cold enough to cut through her blazer, and she was thinking about her grandmother, who had told her in those particular Sicilian syllables. A woman who knows what people say and waits for her moment can end up anywhere. She'd thought it was advice about patience. She understood now that it was advice about something larger. "What did you actually say about me?" she asked. "That night, the dining room." He turned from the water and looked at her. "You know what I said. I know what the words meant. I want to know if you meant them." The pause was different from his usual ones. Not calibrated, just real. "No," he said. "I was being careless. You were being dismissive. Yes, because I was in a uniform and carrying wine and I didn't look like someone you needed to think about." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. He was looking back, and there was nothing managed about his expression, which was, in her experience of him, unusual. "And now?" "Now," he said. "You're the person I can't have a problem I don't want you to know about." She was quiet with that for a moment. The bay moved. A boat crossed, far out. A pelican dropped from nowhere, vertical, into the dark water. "That's not the same as an apology," she said. "No. It's something harder than an apology." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. The wind moved. Below, the city was its usual extravagant self. She stayed on the terrace for another few minutes. Not because she'd decided anything, but because the water was beautiful and she was, for the first time in a long time, exactly somewhere she had chosen to be.